Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. I'm Dr. John McDougall. Hopefully you're tuning in to McDougallFoundation.org. Again, that's McDougallFoundation.org, which is the website dedicated to an optimistic point of view about our environment, our climate, and what we can do about it. And I'll tell you, I've been really looking forward to the interview this morning. As a matter of fact, this man stole a book from me. Yeah, I was in discussions with one of the book companies that I write for about writing a book on diet and climate. And unfortunately, I got frustrated with working at the book company, mainly because they weren't interested enough. They didn't think it would sell enough books. I said, but wait a while. You know, diet and climate are going to be the #1 topic in the world. It will sell millions of books. And I couldn't get any interest out of them in terms of what I thought would be an appropriate amount of interest. So I never got started. I mean, I got started. I read some of the science behind it. I decided to do a website, which you're going to go visit at McDougallFoundation.org. But fortunately, as nature has it, as the world justifies things, there was a man, an expert, who became an expert, actually. I think we'll find out how he got to it, who wrote the book. And it's called Food is Climate, Glen Merzer. Food is Climate. You got to get it. It's the only book outside of mine that is highlighted on our new website, McDougallFoundation.org, because it's the only book that deserves a place. And Glen Merzer, he did it. He came to the desk. He saved me an awful lot of painful days writing a book, collecting the information, because it's so important. Glen Merzer, I'm glad to have you here. Can you give us a little bit of your background? I think you're familiar to most of our viewing audience, and they need to know about you because they're going to know a lot about you in the future.
Well, thank you, Dr. McDougall. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm a writer, and I actually began in San Francisco back in the early 80s as a stand-up comic, and then I became a playwright. And I struggled in the theater world to get my plays, which were mainly comedies, to get them on the stage. And then I started getting hired to write for television in Hollywood. So I wrote sitcoms and dramas. And then along the way, I met Howard Lyman, and I got the opportunity to write my first nonfiction book, to co-author it with Howard Lyman, the book Mad Cowboy. And that got me started doing what is now my life's work, which is to write books advocating the low-fat, whole foods, starch-based, plant-based diet, and try to turn the world vegan as soon as we can.
Well, before we get into the important topic of today, which is, how to play the diet card to make a difference as far as our future is concerned. Let's hear a little bit about your own personal dietary change. I would guess, like most of us, you started out believing in the basic four with a focus on meat and dairy. And
well, I was just a kid and I didn't think about it, and I ate what my parents served me, and so I ate the standard American diet. And I was a healthy kid. There was no problem, except that I didn't know my grandparents because they were dead before I was born, mainly heart disease, also cancer. When I was a teenager, my mother's 2 brothers died of heart attacks. So I lost 2 uncles at 16. My mother developed angina pains, heart disease. On my father's side of the family, all the men died in their 50s. So I looked around at these people around me and I said, if I eat the way these people eat, I'm going to be middle-aged at 25. Why would I want to be middle-aged at 25? So I don't remember if I read any books. I don't think so. I just learned what was really commonly known back at that time. This is the 1970s. That meat causes heart disease. People knew it even then. I guess Ansel Keys had started doing his work in the 40s. So I gave up meat when I was 17. unfortunately, I told my aunt and uncle who were obese, and they were very, very worried about my not getting enough protein. So they said, "How will you get your protein?" And I said, "From cheese." And so stupidly, I continued to eat cheese for the next 19 years. I didn't eat eggs. I didn't eat any other animal products, but my safety valve was I was going to have cheese for the protein. And then in my mid-30s, I started to feel what felt like heart pains to me. I don't know if it was really the beginning of heart disease. I don't know what it was, but on about a dozen occasions, I felt it was almost like an electric shock near my heart. And it would knock me to the ground. And I thought about it and I said, well, I'm not eating meat because of the saturated fat and the cholesterol, but I'm eating cheese, which has saturated fat and cholesterol. It's liquid meat. So I didn't go to a cardiologist. I just stopped cheese, never had any pain again. Everything's been fine ever since. I've never in my life taken a pharmaceutical drug. I've always been in good health. But it's possible that I was starting to develop heart disease because of the cheese back 30 years ago.
You look pretty healthy now. How old are you?
I'm 66.
Are you a family man?
I have a wife, no children.
Good. Okay. Well, let's you're a writer. You in a usual way, by discovery that people around you were sick and dying, you made a transition for yourself. But what did you discover that people had an influence on the climate, and discover this whole global warming stuff that's going on? When did it become aware to you?
Well, I first became aware
before the diet thing. Before the diet, because it happened. I would guess it happened like you learned it and then you figured out the diet connection. And we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah. Well, when I worked on Mad Cowboy with Howard Lyman, I learned a lot from Howard and from the research that he pointed me to on the environment. I learned what animal agriculture was doing to the land and to the water and to the air. Until then, my attitude was I was first a vegetarian and then a vegan, and I was doing it for myself. I never talked about it. I wasn't really interested in what other people ate. I didn't come into the movement from a perspective of animal rights. I have all the respect in the world for people who do, but just the honest truth is it wasn't why I became first a vegetarian, then a vegan. It was for health. And working with Howard Lyman on Mad Cowboy, I began to feel, no, this is important that everybody eat this way for the environment because of what animal agriculture is doing to the land and to the water and to the air. But I didn't know too much then about global warming. That was 1997, 98 when I was working with Howard on Mad Cowboy. There was less attention then to global warming. But since then, and as I've become an author in this space, I've learned more and more about its effect on global warming. And there was the FAO paper that's Livestock's Long Shadow that pegged animal agriculture as 18% of greenhouse gases. And then there was the World Watch paper that pegged it at 51%, at least 51%. And then I heard about this fellow, Dr. Sailesh Rao, who had written a paper pegging greenhouse gases at least 87%. So a year ago, I was working on a book and I thought I'll do a chapter on the climate. And I contacted Dr. Rao and I said, how did you come up with 87%? I read his paper and I talked to him and he has me convinced. I think he's right. And not only that, there are a lot of factors that Sailesh can't even include. It may be 90%, it may be 95%. There are so many ways in which animal agriculture is contributing to climate change that, and this is in a way good news. If we can just stop it, we may be able to reverse climate change. There's so much that we can't model. For example, in this picture on the cover, you'll see all these red areas. This is a NASA satellite image of pasture maintenance fires set on one day. I think this is a day about 15 years ago. So these pasture maintenance fires are set all over the world by people who have ranching operations and sheep and other ruminants on the land. And they're set to burn everything that the cows don't eat. Now, is anyone modeling how much carbon goes into the atmosphere from these pasture maintenance fires set every day of the year? No. And so there's no way to model that. The IPCC will say, oh, it's part of the natural carbon cycle. Well, why is it part of the natural carbon cycle to set fires to burn everything that the cows don't eat? And the cows with their methane are not part of the natural carbon cycle either. There weren't supposed to be 1.4 billion cows on the earth. So there's so many ways in which if we could end animal agriculture, we just might be able to reverse climate change.
So Dr. Rao says that we're going to be able to accomplish this a worldwide institution of a vegan diet by the year 2026. What do you think about his prediction there?
Well, I'm never going to contradict Silas Rao. I'm just going to work to do what his goal is, to try to, he made this promise to his granddaughter that he would transform the world into a vegan world in 5 years, and I'm going to work for it. Obviously, realistically, do I really believe that every individual on earth will be vegan in 5 years? No. But I'll tell you, Dr. McDougall, what I take a lot of solace in and gives me hope, which is when I think about gay marriage. When Barack Obama ran for president in 2008, he didn't support gay marriage. And frankly, had he announced that he was supporting gay marriage, he might not have been elected and we might have had President John McCain. And when he ran for re-election in 2012, he didn't announce he was supporting gay marriage. But by the time his second presidency was over, it was the law of the land. And it became the law of the land because the American people changed. And there were a lot of factors in why the American people changed. Some of it might have to do with television shows and things that people watched on the air. Some of it certainly had to do with the fact that gay individuals were coming out as gay and talking to their friends and family. And it just became, to the American people, it just became more and more wrongheaded to discriminate against the way people love. So eventually the American people just supported gay marriage and it became the law of the land and nobody questions it anymore. So what we have to do now is the same thing. I mean, we have an equally good case that it's foolish to eat dead animals. It's bad for the health, for our health. It's bad for the environment. Obviously, it's bad for the animals. And it causes pandemics. I mean, it's foolish. So we have to make the case and hope that if enough people around the world, but we have to concentrate on America, if enough Americans see the light and start eating this way, they're going to get healthier. Their friends are going to look at them and say, well, how'd you do that? How'd you lose all that weight? How'd you overcome type 2 diabetes? And maybe we can have that kind of snowball effect the way gay marriage had.
Well, to put things into real life practical aspects, how's the book selling?
Book is selling respectably well, but you know, to get a bestseller, you really need to get on television and be in the mainstream media. And so the book is selling respectably well for doing what I'm doing, which is podcasts and, you know, people, word of mouth.
Well, that leads me to another extremely important question. And the why is everybody ignoring? I mean, they really are ignoring all the way from the top of our political system to the average person on the street. They're ignoring the connection. They don't want to hear about it, the connection of diet and climate. Why?
the greatest struggle we face is with culture. There is no scientific case, as you know, in the world of nutrition, there's no scientific case for eating meat. It's preposterous. You look at meat, it's half fat, half carcinogenic protein. It's got no fiber, it's got no antioxidants. It's ridiculous to try to imagine that this could be healthy for you. And yet the meat industry has been able to gaslight people and convince people that they should be eating these substances that are killing. And they're able to do it because of the culture. You know, we all grew up with parents who fed us meat. Our parents loved us. We loved our parents. Our family, extended family ate meat. Our friends ate meat. And so we do what the culture tells us to do. And it's very hard to get people to question their culture. And the point I'm trying to make, and I'm going to try to make it in a PowerPoint I'm developing now, and maybe in my next book, we need to take on our cultures. You know, you can still celebrate what's wonderful in your culture and change an aspect of it that's killing. And in this case, it's suicidal. You know, the civilization will not survive if we keep having this kind of scale of animal agriculture. If we destroy all the life in the seas with industrial fishing, if we have cattle we have animals on 37% of the non-ice land surface of the earth is being grazed, it's preposterous. So we need to change all that. And the only way to do it is we have to realize that the only reason we're doing it in the first place is because of our cultures. And cultures can change.
Do you have any ideas on where you'd put the effort as far as getting cultures to change? I mean, it was a good analogy you gave with the gay movement. Yeah. You know, it really within a flash of our eyes, we saw that change, and that was really deeply embedded in society.
Exactly. So that was part of our culture that changed.
Yeah. Well, what are the keys? Where would you push the buttons?
Well,
we're going to talk to. You know, go ahead. I mean, just to give you some background. I mean, here we're in a world war, so to speak, with Russia, and you know, all the oil companies have given up on Russia. You know, something I never ever thought would happen. The airlines won't let Russian airplanes fly over the United States. I mean, that all happened within the last couple of days. So big movement is possible. And what greater cause could there be than saving our home? Right. Where do we push the buttons?
Right. Well, you know, we all have to do whatever we can do. I write books, and I'm going to try perhaps to start a YouTube channel and have my own podcast. And, you know, we all have to spread the message however we can, whether it's through social media or any other methods we have. I'm hoping that somebody in our movement will break through and get into mainstream media, you know, have a television show or get into the mainstream. We just have to keep making the case. Obviously, there are more vegans than there were a few years ago, but it has to multiply.
Well, it's going to be from the bottom up, or at least it appears to be. But I have to say, you know, based on my background of spending, you know, 45 years trying to get people to understand the importance of diet in terms of their own personal health, and it's been so slow, you know, and we can't tolerate that kind of slowness. We've got to push some buttons. We've got to somehow wave our hands so that people will notice us. And we have to bring this into mainstream consciousness very quickly. How do we do that? I mean, bottom up, yes, the consumer has a lot to say with their dollar, but we got to get the message to so many people. You know, we have to get the politicians aware, the big business people aware. And it seems like they're coming aware. But the question is, how much time do we have, Glen Merzer? You know, author of Food is Climate. Come on, I ask a lot of people, how much time do we have? And I say that with a background. When we heard about this, you heard about it in the 1990s. I wasn't so fortunate. I didn't hear about it until 2006 with Al Gore. You know, at that time they told us we had 100 years, a century to worry about this, and then they told us, well, maybe it's only 50 years, and then maybe 25, and now the organizations like Eat Lancet are coming out and telling us we got 12 years. How much time do we have, Glen Merzer, to get this? I mean, is Solis Raoult, is 2026 sooner? I need to have a timeline. And then that's the last negative thing I want to talk to you about. I want to talk about how we're going to solve this after that. But how much time do I have?
I can't give you a fixed number of years. And one reason is that we face tipping points. And nobody knows when we could face these tipping points, these negative feedback loops. You know, when you have wildfires, puts more carbon into the atmosphere, leads to more drought, leads to more wildfires. When the permafrost melts, methane gets released, leads to more heat, leads to more permafrost melting. When you have sea ice melting, leads to more ocean, which is darker, leads to more sea ice melting. So we have these negative feedback loops. We have to get into positive feedback loops. So for example, if we protect the oceans, if we can have an international moratorium on industrial fishing, if we could protect the oceans, we can improve the phytoplankton populations. We could save all the life in the seas. And with improved phytoplankton populations, we will have more carbon sequestration, we'll have more seeding of clouds, and we'll be in a positive feedback loop. So we need to move from negative feedback loops to positive feedback loops. And I can't, you know, and how much time do we have before the negative feedback loops keep kicking in a way that's irreversible? I don't know. Nobody knows, but we shouldn't play around with it.
Yeah, right. Well, there's no sense in dwelling in the negative, because everybody else out there is saying that, you know, we're in big trouble if they're being honest with us. You know, I often wondered why we don't do something as simple as taking our military, every country, taking their military and put them on fire lines. Why aren't they fighting wildfires? That's our enemy.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, you know, it's not some foreign country. It's not some ideology. It is Mother Nature, who doesn't seem to give a darn about our emotional state.
We have to do everything we can to stop wildfires. They're a climate catastrophe. I was just watching a video today that apparently in Japan, they've come up with a fire retardant that isn't toxic. So at least we ought to be using that too when we battle wildfires. You know, the utilities have to do everything they can do to prevent these wildfires from getting started. You know, wildfires are a disaster.
Well, I can speak personally from that. We lost everything in the October 2017 California fires. So I've been through that experience personally, and
yeah, and that fire was why my wife and I decided to get out of California. We were living in Woodland Hills, and I said to my wife, you know, can I guarantee that what happened in Santa Rosa can't happen in Woodland Hills? I can't. Let's get out.
Well, I can't say that it made a big influence on me as far as my interest. My interest came about when I realized that that this is the number one card on the table, is the food and the climate. And that, of course, coincided with the birth of my first grandson in the year 2004. Plus, I'll tell you something else. I kind of expended myself, Glen Merzer. I kind of expended myself in terms of diet and individual health over a period of 45 years. I really wasn't challenged anymore by figuring out why people are sick and how to get them well. And I figured I would just as soon, during the last couple of decades of my life, focus my attention on a patient that doesn't seem to be listening at the present time, and that patient is the planet Earth. So that's where I got interested, as I just realized that there's no sense in dedicating my efforts to saving the individual anymore. We got to act bigger, and I want to talk about bigger here. You talked about various areas, and I know you've kind of touched on them. And you know, my intention is not to get you to repeat yourself. I just want to extend some of the discussions that we started. Food is Climate is the book. It's Glen Merzer, and he has a website that I'd like you to know about. Can you tell us what your website is?
It's glenmerzer.com.
Okay, so you want to keep up with new things that Mr. Merzer's discovered, and obviously you can tell he's a very practical person. He's got some real discreet, which I really like. Tell me what I can do in a positive way to make a difference. And again, you've kind of fed a whole bunch of those things into a discussion I would like to have for you now. And go ahead and repeat yourself. Let's start with the oceans, which are my favorite. And I've been a scuba diver, a windsurfer, a sailor, a lover of the oceans for my entire life. And I see them rapidly disappearing or changing in a very negative way.
Well,
fish.
the humanity has been negatively affecting the oceans in a lot of ways, including plastics and other pollutants. But the greatest injury to the oceans by far is from industrial fishing. So that's what we have to stop.
But we need to, I think we have to straighten out. You gave a bit of an introduction about calcium and protein and what nonsense that is in terms of nutritional truth. People need to understand that fish are not health food. No. They provide omega-3 fats, which are originally made by plants. You need to get them from plants. Fish are so dirty from the environment that you can tell how many fish a person eats based upon their methylmercury levels in their body. This is not health food, folks. There's nothing a fish offers you that you want or need. Leave them alone. I mean, is that where you would start? I try and convince people on a personal level to pick at the dinner table. Other things, well, I like potatoes. I tell them pick, not fish.
Yeah. And when you think about the insanity of our global food system now, the greatest ocean predator in the world is the cow, because we're feeding all this fish to cows. It's
I love it. That's a great statement. I'm going to use that one, Glen Merzer. The greatest predator of the ocean. It's not the great white shark that I have to worry about anymore. It's the darn cow.
The cow.
Yeah.
And then we have these fish farms where we feed fish to fish in closed quarters. So we're doing with fish the same thing we do with chickens. We're congregating them in small areas until they get diseased.
Yeah, what's the problem with fish farming? Good grief, you're growing them in ponds. I mean, come on, tell us what's the problem.
All people have to do is see the movie Seaspiracy.
Yeah, that's a good one.
See these sick fish with open sores, and people are eating this terribly unhealthy stuff.
Well, they don't realize that the fish food comes from the ocean, and therefore we deplete our little fish supply by feeding them to the farm fish. And like you say, there's all kinds of pollutants. They dump the waste from the fish farms back into our living waters. And infection's a real problem, as you mentioned. So fish farms aren't going to be the answer, but it seems to be a temporary gap that people have introduced. And of course, you find farm fish more commonly these days than you do natural fish. Okay, so anything else you want to add to the oceans? How about the mining of minerals? People are taking and scraping the ocean bottom. Do you see any issues there as far as the climate goes? Or should we just let them continue to hey, man, I need a battery for my electric car. If I got to go to the bottom of the ocean for my lithium, what do you think?
Well, the mining all over the earth is another, insult to the planet. And we have to do everything we can to limit it and stop it where we can. My great cause is to start with the low-hanging fruit, because the easiest thing we can do is to stop the stupidity of eating animals.
All right. Well, so we're not going to eat animals. And I did hear you mention the word starch. I hope I've been an influence on you by trying to popularize the word starch. There are a whole bunch of starches out there, and there are three big ones that supply the earth right now, which are corn, wheat, and rice, and potatoes. So I guess there are four.
Yeah. And
of your favorite starches, personally, as well as an objective to get the most out of our land and the most calories for the most people, You have any favorite starches?
Potatoes. Now that was an easy one. I was asked by Dr. McDougall, so I'm saying potatoes. But it is potatoes. And the thing is, I like purple potatoes. I like all kinds of potatoes. I like a variety of potatoes. And so they're just the most filling, satisfying food. And whether it's boiled or baked or cooked in any way, I'm happy with it.
Oh, plus they grow at almost any type of environment. They grow by the ocean. They grow on mountaintops. They grow in wet. They go in dry. They just grow. They just,
Yeah.
they're so different species. Yeah, I'm glad I've been an influence on you. I think the potatoes should go too. Hey, but I would be happy if rice dominated, or wheat, or soybeans, or whatever. It doesn't make any potato. Let's go with potato. All right. How about restaurants? Do you see people are wanting to eat out all the time? What are you going to do about that fascination with restaurants? I suppose we could take a look at it. Is there becoming more? Are there more vegan restaurants, more vegetarian?
There are more. I think there are more and more vegan restaurants, and I view look. People are always going to want to go to restaurants, and I used to enjoy going to restaurants. I don't hold out too much hope that we'll ever live in a time where restaurants serve food that's as healthy as my wife and I make here at home. But you go out once in a while and you have fun and you meet with your friends, and if the food isn't quite so healthy, that's okay, as long as it's vegan. For the climate, as long as it's vegan. Even if they use a little oil, which they shouldn't, or they, don't use organic, or they use some processed food, as long as it's vegan, I'm satisfied. And I don't personally, certainly not since the pandemic, but I don't personally go to restaurants very often.
Well, I've kind of taken that attitude too, with a little bit of criticism. I don't recommend the oil because it's so toxic to individuals, but I get criticized a lot for allowing salt and sugar on the surface of the food. Hey, I just want them to eat the darn food.
Right.
And they're more likely to eat it if it has salt and sugar on it, on the surface, of course. So do you see any, is there any hope in the government? Do you see any particular people or any particular segments of the government that you would like to approach? We have a vegan mayor of New York, so let's see what he can do in terms of policy. And I think he's trying to encourage healthier food in hospitals and schools. He's taking baby steps. Maybe that's all he can do. We have Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, who's a vegan. There may be a few others out there, but for the most part, I'll use the analogy again of gay marriage. I don't expect the politicians to lead. And, I'm not even sure. Well, let's just say I would get nervous if some politician who I like adopted my positions and advocated them openly, because I would worry that he or she might not get reelected. Right.
I know that my positions are not, I'm calling in my books for taxes on slaughterhouses. And that'll raise the price of meat. That's exactly the intended effect, but that's not popular. So I'm making this case to try to change public opinion, to try to get more and more people to go vegan, and then maybe the politicians will follow. But you can't look to them to lead, and I don't want the better ones to lose office to the worst ones.
Well, let's talk about that favoritism to business. We've often subsidized some of the most damaging businesses on our planet. Do you see any type of taxation at the level of businesses? I never thought of it, Glen Merzer, from that point of view. I've always thought of it from a consumer tax point of view, like we tax cigarettes, we tax alcohol. Do we tax it at the dinner table, or you introduced a new level where we ought to impose the taxation, which is at the business level? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, if I were in Congress and I proposed a slaughterhouse tax, I wouldn't get it through Congress because people will say, no, that'll raise the price of meat and chicken. And I'll say, yeah, that's the point. And I wouldn't get it through. But at least I would be arguing not that the consumer is going to be taxed directly, but that the businesses will be taxed. I'm trying to punish those businesses.
Right.
And help the consumer by nudging them along to eating healthy foods. From my point of view, that's the more logical way to approach the problem, and the way that would engender less immediate consumer outrage. But it would also probably be simpler to impose. But we do have to tax. Look, we tax alcohol, we tax cigarettes. Let's tax meat and dairy. They're hurting us. So that's my case: is we should tax things that are that cause harm, and then use the tax money to do things that are good. You know, whether it's education, protecting the environment, and so forth.
Well, as I said, those taxes you mentioned on alcohol and tobacco, they're levied on the consumer, not on industry.
Right. Right.
So you have a whole new way of doing it, which is to levy it on industry. And nothing more than I can imagine the government wanting than a better source of income. So why not? Somebody needs to be aware of the fact that there's a lot of money that goes into our animal agriculture business that they're not taking advantage of. And to turn that money into winning political campaigns and to doing the right thing for the environment sounds like the right thing to do to me.
Yeah.
You got some good money-saving ideas, and money's where it really counts, I have to say. Everything I've learned in my 74 years on this planet have told me that money is the motivator, not conspiracies, not really hurting our fellow human being, except indirectly by the fact that making money seems to be the most important thing for human beings to do. How can we change the money in the right direction, Glen Merzer?
My friend Silas Rao talks about a whole new approach to the economy. And as I say, I never want to contradict Silas.
All right.
He's got this great optimism and this great spirit. I tend to think that we need to have a realistic approach, in that I think that people will always want jobs and always want to earn a living. And we can change the tax code in such a way that we can, make sure that billionaires pay more taxes, and we can help people who work jobs like being school teacher that don't pay so much, but they do good. So, I think we should adjust the tax code that way. And I think that, maybe this idea of a universal basic income isn't such a bad idea. Maybe we can toy around with that.
I'm pushing you a little bit on this finance, so I'm going to push you a little harder on something else that I haven't given enough thought to, but I hope you have. Look, we have the United States making a tiny bit of effort in terms of climate.
Yeah.
We have countries like China, which has a dietary goals for their country that contain half the meat that we have in our dietary goals. It seems like other countries are more progressive in their efforts to deal with the climate. But the real question I have is, okay, so we in the US, we decide, or in developed democratic countries, we decide that this is really important. How do we get the rest of the countries, the rest of the power players in the world to get along with it? They must have grandchildren too. I can't understand, what's the sense of having money if you don't have family, if you don't have a life? It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, we can put pressure on the countries, on the power players.
The most conservative Americans whose politics I generally disagree with, but they will talk about how America, America first, and how America leads the world. Well, okay, let's lead the world in doing this. I mean, look, Hollywood is certainly the leading film industry in the world. Certainly in many ways, I mean, in a negative way, we affected the world with our lousy fast food industry, and now you have McDonald's all over the world. So America can lead the world in a good way. If there were a vegan transformation, I mean, just imagine if 50% of Americans went vegan. Just imagine what would happen in Europe and China and Africa. You know, we'll have an effect on the rest of the world if we lead. So my efforts are concentrated on transforming as many people as possible to healthy vegan eating. And if we can do that in America, we'll certainly affect the rest of the world.
Well, 2.5 years ago, I received an award from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, a Lifetime Achievement Award, and I was pleased to get this, to say the least. But I asked if I could have a few minutes of time. And I talked to over 500 American College of Lifestyle Medicine physicians and ancillary people about the power of diet on affecting our climate. And I got a standing ovation, in fact, maybe 2 or 3 standing ovations. So they were very pleased to hear the message. But I did have one doctor come up to me and ask me an important question that I would ask anybody in any business, no matter what you do. But this man asked me, why should I study for the board examinations for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine? Why should I study to be a more effective doctor in terms of diet therapy to help people? How can a doctor practice medicine on a dead planet? How do you do anything on a dead planet? How do you be a banker? How do you be a mobster? How do you do anything on a dead planet? You know, let's get real.
Well, I think we have to realize that the only way this won't become a dead planet is if we have a global transformation to the vegan diet. And, you know, I saw on your website, you had an interview with an interesting fellow, though he had a fairly grim outlook, named Rupert Reed.
Oh, yeah.
And he said there are no silver bullets. And it depends how you define silver bullet. There's certainly no solution that we can snap our fingers and overnight we could reverse climate change. There's no quick technological fix. There's no easy solution. But when you perceive how much of global warming is actually being caused by animal agriculture, there's the methane from the ruminants. There's the degradation of the soil from the grazing. There's the carbon opportunity cost, which is, imagine if we didn't graze 37% of the non-ice land surface of the earth, but we rewilded it and reforested, how much carbon we would sequester. There's the other 6% of the land surface of the earth that's being wasted to grow feed for the animals and all the energy inputs for that. There's the nitrous oxide and the methane from the animal waste. 5,000 tons a second of animal waste in America. And then there's the oceans. There's the fact that we're destroying the phytoplankton populations as we extract all life from the seas. If we stopped all that, there are so many ways in which the climate will improve that just could be a silver bullet. And at very least, it could allow us some time to deal with the fossil fuel problem. So we don't have to, if we would all go vegan tomorrow, then we don't all have to give up airplanes and cars tomorrow. We can continue to burn some fossil fuels for at least some time, as long as we all stop these unnecessary uses of these greenhouse gases that are going into the atmosphere for no reason. You know,
in contrast to what you said, which are all the real aspects of what we could do and what power we have. I've heard it predicted that we could reduce personally our contribution of greenhouse gases by 80% overnight. with all of these facts, undeniable facts, why is food the most neglected of all topics? I mean, people will talk about, saving plastic bags. They'll talk about recycling your paper bag. They'll talk all kinds of things that are irrelevant or make so little difference. And yet food falls way below them as far as our consciousness, our radar is concerned. Come on, give me an answer. I want to know so I can fix it.
Several answers. One answer is it has to do with what we can see. So Al Gore will give his presentations, and Al Gore never talks about animal agriculture. He's even shy about the fact that he's apparently a vegan. I'm not sure, but he doesn't like to talk about it. And he'll show his slideshow presentations, and you'll see smokestacks. And boy, those smokestacks look bad. This black smoke going up into the atmosphere, and it is bad. And he talks about we can't stop using the atmosphere as an open sewer. All right, well, you can see that. You can't see the methane coming out of cows. You can't see the soil degradation from the overgrazing. You can't see the forests that don't exist because of the grazing. You can't see the reduced phytoplankton populations. So we have this visual problem. The things that you can see are the fossil fuels, the exhaust out of the trucks, the smokestacks. We have to realize that it's not just about what you can see, it's also what you can't see. So that's part of the problem. And another part of the problem is the media and the politicians, many of whom don't know the truth. They just keep repeating what they've heard. And maybe if they mention animal agriculture, maybe they say it's 15% of the problem. But it may be 90, 95% of the problem. It's far, far more than what we hear about. And then there's the fact that the culture is the last thing that people want to question. They don't want to question how they eat. They're willing to make a change from a gas car to an electric car, but they don't want to think about changing from eating steak to eating rice and beans. But the truth is that it'll make much, much more difference if they change to rice and beans, and it's easier to do. And the only side effects are you live longer, you don't get heart disease, you don't get diabetes, you don't get cancer. So all the side effects are good. So when you compare the fossil fuel solution to the food solution, fossil fuels come with social goods. Flying is a social good. I enjoyed my trips to Paris, and people fly to see family and loved ones. Fossil fuels and transportation and cooking with fossil fuels and heating your home with fossil fuels are all social goods. There is no social good associated with meat eating. It's just disease and death and pandemics. There's no social good. So that's why I call this the low-hanging fruit. Let's do the easy thing. Let's make the one change where we don't have to make any sacrifice. We just wind up with greater health.
Well, I heard one of the most important, certainly one of the richest men in the world, come out and tell us that there's nothing off the table. We should consider every single possibility, no matter how remote, as far as saving our climate. Tell me what you think of Bill Gates.
Well, I wrote about him, in Food is Climate, the subtitle is A Response to Al Gore, Bill Gates, Paul Hawken, and the Conventional Narrative on Climate Change. If I could talk to Bill Gates, I would tell him how much good he could do if he was just willing to. For one thing, he could use his money to buy up all the cattle ranches in the country and rewild them. Then he'd be making a great contribution. Then he could use his money to put arguments like the ones we're making now and put them in TV commercials and put them on the airwaves and let people know how much healthier they would be if they ate a whole foods, low-fat, starch-based, plant-based diet. So there are so many things he could do with his money. And I know he's invested in some meat alternative products. And I know he's bought a lot of land. I don't know what he does with it. But if he could contribute to rewilding, and he could contribute to public understanding of the nature of the problem, if he was willing to.
Would you have this interview with him at his favorite burger restaurant in Seattle?
As long as I don't eat a burger, I'll be happy to talk with him anyway.
You would still look at Bill Gates across the table and give him a lecture on eating meat while he's chewing down on a cheeseburger, huh?
I would do so happily.
You are so nice. How about, I don't know, Paul Hawkins and his contribution to this whole mess. Could you give us a...
Paul Hawkins is a writer. He's a writer. He's an economist. He's an entrepreneur. He's a brilliant guy. I think has always been based in the Bay Area. I have actually met him on 3 occasions, and he wouldn't remember any of them, but I ran into him twice at Whole Foods and spoke with him. And I also spoke with him once when he was speaking at a group called Tree People in Los Angeles. And every time I spoke with him, he just seems like the nicest guy. It's just, you know, he's very open and gave me his time, and I'm gonna guess he's a great guy. But he's got this attitude. He's established himself as one of the leading figures in the climate fight. He wrote this book and has this organization called Drawdown that makes the correct point that we need to draw down carbon dioxide. We can't just be trying to cut emissions to 0 and everything's fine the way it is. No, we need to draw it down. So he's got all these technological solutions, some of which are about reducing emissions and some of them about drawing down carbon dioxide. But his attitude is, we don't judge anybody. We don't judge any industry. And so when he has as one of his solutions a plant-strong diet, and I don't know what he means by a plant-strong, he doesn't say don't eat meat. So he knows that it's better for the climate to eat plants than eat animals, so he says a plant-strong diet is a good thing. But he's unwilling to say don't eat meat, let's end animal agriculture. And I heard him on a video make that point explicitly. He said, we don't judge. Plant-strong diet, it just means eat what you want, whatever is good for you. We don't judge. We don't say anything is right or anything is wrong. And you know, Dr. McDougall, I generally like non-judgmental people. I don't go around judging everybody for the way they dress or, you know, or anything they do. I don't like just, you know, I don't enjoy being with people who have judgments on everything in the world and you know, and alienate people based on judgments. But when you're destroying the planet, and the children who are being born aren't going to live full lives because, you know, nobody's going to be able to breathe. When the temperature in Portland went to 115 and 116 and 117 3 days in a row, we have to start making some judgments. We have to say the meat industry is pernicious. It has to be stopped. And that's where Paul Hawkins is unwilling to go. So that's my case against Paul Hawkins, is he's too nice a guy. He needs to say some things are right and some things are wrong. And other than that, he does make contributions in terms of highlighting some strategies we could use, particularly with fossil fuels. But he needs to condemn animal agriculture.
Glen Merzer. It's a book that you want to get. It's called Food is Climate. Glen Merzer at glenmerzer.com. You can reach him. I like to just, you know, one final thought. I mean, really, is there something that really aggravates you, that it keeps you awake at night, that causes you to be anxious in the morning? You wake up and, I mean, besides the fact that we're not going to accomplish what you and I are trying to accomplish, along with Sailesh Rayol and the rest of the people out there that understand this very important part of saving our home. Is there anything else that's really on your mind, Glen Merzer?
Well, lots of, you know, we have a war going on right now, and we have to hope that this lunatic doesn't doesn't
That's
carpet
that's carbon intensive, isn't it? Having a war is carbon intensive.
Yes, it is. It's terrible for it's a humanitarian disaster. It's also terrible for the environment. And so I look for hope. I'm hoping they'll topple this madman in Russia, and then maybe we'll have a better world. I am on the subject that we have dedicated our respective careers to try to make people healthier. One pet peeve of mine is how people keep talking about protein when there isn't one person in America, I think, who's in a hospital for a protein shortage. Right. It's just preposterous. And the truth is that plant protein is healthy, is superior to animal protein. And even in climate, when they talk about they'll say that when you put cows on the land, you get this much protein per acre. Yeah. And you get more protein per acre, of course, if you grow vegetables. But why are we even talking about protein? Let's talk about calories. It's calories that matter. And why when people go to restaurants and the waiter says, "What's your choice of protein?" Why don't they say, "What's your choice of saturated fat and cholesterol?"
Well, I just want you to know, I dedicated the first 2 lectures I did on my new website, McDougallFoundation.org, McDougallFoundation.org. I did one on protein, a 4-hour discussion of protein. And as a contrast to that, I did a 4-hour discussion on potatoes. So I felt those 2 subjects were so important, just like you brought out in our very, very enlightening interview. I thought those subjects were so important, and what the world needs to know, what doctors, dietitians, scientists need to know, is that there's no such thing as protein deficiency, and we're killing ourselves and the planet because of this one nutrient. It's not really a nutrient because nobody's deficient in it.
Exactly.
Said. The book is Food is Climate. Glen Merzer has been on my guest, and a very enlightening guest, I have to say. You brought more practical knowledge to our listening public than so far, but I'm looking for experts out there in the world that can bring some movement soon that causes us to think that we're going to start doing positive things instead of talking about the trouble we're in. And you've done that, Glen Merzer. You've been able to bring to light some very positive things and to focus on some of the real troubles that we're having in introducing diet as the most powerful change that we can make in terms of saving our planet for our children and grandchildren. Glen Merzer, I want to thank you very much for spending the hour with me. It's been a pleasure. We'll do it again sometime.
Thank you, Dr. McDougall. It's been a pleasure for me.